how will Huggy appear in Chapter 5? At the end of Chapter 4, we saw Huggy Wuggy finally make his long-awaited return, giving me a ton of questions about how he survived and why he came back to attack us, all of which we are going to be explaining today. So firstly, to rewind, all the way back in Chapter 1, we came across a mysterious, seemingly inanimate statue of the popular toy Huggy Wuggy. However, quickly he came to life and ran away, where throughout the rest of the chapter he poked his head around, hinting to him watching us, culminating to the classic chase scene where Huggy finally reveals himself from the darkness with a big hungry mouth and chases us throughout the events. He wouldn't last long though, as we would eventually drop a large box onto his head, knocking him down deeper into the factory, presumably ending his life. But many people were skeptical he was really gone, as in Chapter 2 we would see that he had actually fallen through the water treatment area, leaving behind blood and hair, causing people to believe he might actually still be alive, and the devs were keeping him in the back of our minds for later in the game. In Chapter 3, we were teased heavily again, as after inhaling some of Catnap's red smoke, we began to hallucinate, where from a TV, a nightmarish version of Huggy's bigger body broke through it and chased us, again keeping Huggy on our minds. And finally, in Chapter 4, after a bit of clever foreshadowing, at the very end of the game, we finally saw Huggy return in an injured and angry state, attacking us through the lab's window before the game ends, giving us our cliffhanger for Chapter 5. And I'm left with three main questions to answer in this video. How did Huggy survive his fall? Why did he come back to attack us after what we did? And how will he appear in Chapter 5? And to answer the first question of how he even survived, I actually think it's pretty simple. Since, as you probably already know, Huggy was clearly hurt from the fall. We saw it leave a blood trail throughout Chapters 1 and 2. Plus, he's literally missing an arm. We learned through Kissy's arm tearing off just from holding us in the Chapter 4 ending that these creatures are generally softer since they're based off stuffed animals, and therefore while they tear easily, that could explain how Huggy survived the large fall. Plus, regardless on how he survived, we could see that somebody repaired him afterwards. Something I've theorized about in past videos, but to go more in depth, it's pretty safe to assume this had to be the prototype's doing. Since we saw throughout the chapters, he would frequently collect the bodies of our victims, likely for his own experiments and creations. Plus, we also learn in a super vague Chapter 4 VHS tape that the prototype and Harley Sawyer were working together on some kinds of experiments. They don't specify exactly what, but that might support that the prototype knew how to work on these creations. And even more proof of this is like a year or so ago in this Discord message from the CEO Zach. He was asked to compare the Poppy Playtime characters to Star Wars characters, where he said the prototype was Palpatine and Huggy was Darth Vader. Darth Vader being a revived version of Anakin Skywalker resurrected by Palpatine. Obviously hinting the prototype saved Huggy, especially since this message is now deleted off of his Discord, presumably because it was too revealing and confirmed the popular theory 1006 was responsible for Huggy's villainous return. But then this brings up the obvious next question. Why did Huggy return to try and attack us? We were the reason Huggy almost died, just barely surviving, so why afterwards would he immediately come back to try and run it again? Well, at first, the obvious answer most people would say is because, well, Huggy was obedient to his leaders and listened to what they said. We learned throughout the game's lore and whatnot that Huggy was considered a near perfect experiment because he was both powerful and strong-minded, but was also obedient, willing to listen to the orders of his higher-ups, including the employees. So you could easily argue the prototype simply ordered him to attack us and that was his role, simple enough. However, something that shakes this entire theory up and complicates things way more is back for Poppy Playtime's 12 days of Playtime celebration. They released a bunch of little lore drops for various different characters, including one on Huggy Wuggy, which actually delved deeper into his quote-unquote obedience by saying Huggy Wuggy was a milestone success, being both intelligent and highly agreeable with staff. As it turns out, Playtime mistook his patience for obedience, and have paid the price for it more than once as a result. Meaning that while Huggy was generally regarded as obedient, he was actually just simply patient and waited for the right time to attack. One example we got of this was in Huggy's restricted disappearance tape released on Mob's YouTube channel a couple years back, where Huggy, for seemingly no reason, planned some kind of escape and ran away from the factory into a forest, going completely feral, destroying everything in sight and also attacking multiple employees who didn't survive. Plus, they mentioned this being a multiple time occurrence, suggesting this was a problem that had happened on various different instances. Maybe he could have somehow been responsible responsible for some of the other mystery tragedies, like this one from the orientation notebook regarding a lawyer getting injured in a factory visit, or the theater incident, some kind of event Harley Sawyer coordinated where dozens of visitors of the theater were mysteriously killed, maybe by a monster. But going back to the VHS tape, what this shows is that in reality, Huggy had some kind of motive he was set on here. They only caught Huggy because after reaching a residential neighborhood, he was spotted standing outside of a house and caught there. And the employees mention in the book they can't come to any conclusion for the reason, but clearly there was some kind of purpose. Maybe to let the people know the experiments existed, or maybe this person living in this house is somehow related to him. I'm not sure. But what this means is that Huggy isn't blindly attacking us just to attack us, unlike other toys like Catnap who did it under other people's orders. There is clearly a reason after everything he went through to get here, he is still returning to try and destroy us. But then what is that reason? Well, maybe it was simply to get back at us for what we did after chapter 1, or just because he was hungry and wanted food, but I actually think it goes much deeper. Since, as we mentioned earlier, after inhaling Catnap's red smoke in the dream sequence, we started to see a bunch of text on the walls and audios showing that us as a former employee at Playtime Co felt extremely guilty about our responsibilities for the experiments inside of the factory, along with our survivor's guilt for surviving the hour of joy while every other employee didn't. With us even remembering a report where the body of a young boy was found hidden away in the house of Elliot Ludwig. Then afterwards, we walk into some kind of experiment area, something we wouldn't really see until later in the game, suggesting this was coming from the player's memory when they were an employee, and that they might have been responsible for working on some of the children before the Nightmare Huggy comes out of the screen and attacks us. And a theory that has gone around for a little bit now to explain this is that among all of the guilty imagery the player sees, they remember 3 specific things from their past with the experiments: the body bag of a young boy being discovered, a lab room where they worked on the experiments, and of course Huggy specifically. But why would he remember these specific incidents when there were thousands of children experimented on and other violent toys like Mommy Longlegs who had tried to attack us previously? Well, it's believed because we might have had a special connection to Huggy in particular. The young boy more than likely being the child that would eventually become Huggy, the lab likely being the area where he was created, and of course us seeing him physically chase us, all combining to tell the narrative that we might have been the person who made the Huggy experiment. And after feeling so much guilt for what we did and surviving the hour of joy, which was meant to be our punishment, Huggy coming back and attacking us felt like what we deserved for closure. Now this all makes sense and is a theory that has been discussed before, but most importantly for his return in chapter 4, it gives us a perfect why for Huggy attacking us. We know he was smart and was extremely calculated, so I don't think he did this to simply get revenge out of anger after chapter 1 or just because he was hungry. And instead, what I think he was doing was he was trying to get revenge for what the player had done to him and the rest of the experiments by being an employee here, to finally give us the punishment for putting these innocent children through this pain in the same way he did the others in the hour of joy. But this time it's much more personal because we were the ones who created him specifically, giving us our why for Huggy's return. But then how will he actually appear in chapter 5? Well, I think lore-wise he's going to be extremely important. Like we mentioned earlier, they said there might have been more incidents involving Huggy that we might not know about. So I'm sure if true, that'll be explored more in chapter 5, and if they're willing to reveal so much about him on just some random throwaway sheet of paper on their Twitter, then who knows what else we don't know about him that'll be explored in the next chapter. Maybe we'll learn what kind of child he is, what exactly his motive was in that previously mentioned VHS tape, or confirmation if we were the one truly responsible for his creation. Because while it was teased in chapter 3, we still don't know for sure, but they do tend to tease theories at first and confirm them later, like the Poppy Elliot Ludwig's daughter theory and the flammable red gas theory. But I asked you guys how you think he would actually physically appear, and it seems like most of the general audience says that he's probably going to be a Yarnaby type character who is going to try and hunt us down, hungrier and angrier than ever, being like the lurking enemy of this chapter, while whoever the main villain and other characters are exist around him. Some other people theorize that chapter 5 might actually start with a Huggy chase scene and he will be our introduction into the game before continuing on forward. And on the other hand, I actually saw a lot of people claiming that Huggy might end up being our ally. I'm guessing because, for one, in the Sleep Well music video, we saw Huggy and Kissy, our ally, actually sticking together inside of Playcare following the Hour of Joy, so maybe he'd be willing to work with us as long as Kissy she's by our side. And also because the whole meaning of that song was to show that after the hour of joy that the prototype coordinated, the children realized they hated everything about it and wanted to revolt, possibly including Huggy, which, while it's a fun theory, he definitely doesn't look like he's planning on being friendly anytime soon.